So what I would invite you to do is I would invite you to think what research means to you. Right? At this point, you can pause the video and you can maybe draw some mind map or write down some ideas or go for a walk and come back to the video, or like do anything you want maybe for the next 10-15 minutes, and think what research means to you, and we come back. Okay, so these are just some ideas that we've collected in the past with students, with colleagues, what research means to people. You can read through that list, but I think what is important at this point is that we are not going to impose, or we're not going to limit what research is, but we want you to, over the next few weeks, we want you to think what research is for you and how, if and how you would like to engage with research. This could be that you have absolutely no plans of becoming a researcher. That's perfectly fine. But perhaps as a practitioner, as a professional in your area, perhaps this course and this program is going to help you bring research into what you do. Perhaps it's going to help you inform your practice better than before. Or perhaps you are going to flirt with research and conduct some research, or collaborate with researchers, or talk to researchers more than you did before. Or even perhaps for some of you, of course, you do plan to become a researcher. And in that case, you need to ask yourself what type of researcher you want to become, because there is not only one type, there are many types. And there are many places where you can conduct research. You can do it in a private organization, in a company, you can do it in a public institution, you can do it at the community level, you can do it as a freelancer, you can do it, of course, as an academic in a university. You can do it in a hybrid mode of all of those, all of the above. And look, every time we are figuring out new ways of practicing research and connecting research and practice. So that's up to you. Again, another topic number 2, that we can comment in the forum and learn from each other and ask questions from each other. I have a couple of resources that I can share with people of researchers that are outside academia, or researchers that are with one foot in academia, one foot outside academia. So again, at this point, what is really important, at least in the area of creative technologies, is to always keep in mind the connection between research and practice. Whether you become a researcher full-time, or whether you are a practitioner full-time, I think always to have that connection to the other side just makes your work much better. If you're researching a topic in creative technologies and you have opportunities to collaborate with practitioners, to study practitioners, to design with practitioners, that's going to make your research much better. And if you're a practitioner and you have the chance to collaborate with researchers, work with them, that's going to make your practice much, much better. So what I'm doing here is, obviously a lot of people have thought about the connection between research and practice. And there are different communities. There are communities, especially in art and design circles. There are all sorts of communities. Some people call it practice-led research, practice-oriented research, practice-based research. So that's why, almost as a provocation, I chose in this slide to show you research on the left-hand side, practice on the right-hand side, and in the middle, kind of like all these prepositions connecting research and practice, just as a way to stimulate your thinking and help you think, how do you see that connection between research and practice for you? Okay. Remember that research, we defined it we don't have one single definition, but we've defined it generally as studying something systematically to produce new understandings. So obviously we are in an academic space, and you enrolled in a postgraduate program in a university. So we're going to be talking about research outputs, mainly papers that are published in journals, academic journals, books, conferences, and so on. But this is what I wanted to do here, what I wanted to show you here, is that there are many ways of producing knowledge, and there are many ways of understanding the world around us. And art, of course, is one of them. So movies, music, paintings, sculptures, all sorts of, obviously, literature, poetry, artistic ways of knowing have been probably the most ancient way of understanding the world around us, or making sense of the world around us. So in no way would I like to for you to think that because we're talking about academic research, I do not pretend that only academic research is the way to produce knowledge, and only academic research is the way to quote unquote properly advance knowledge. I don't believe in that. I believe that there are many types of knowledge, and there are many means and many ways of producing knowledge and applying knowledge and testing knowledge, like great movies, great stories. So here what I did as an example is, on the left hand side you have Google Scholar. If you're not familiarized with Google Scholar, I think that's going to be kind of like homework for this week. Go to Google Scholar, scholar.google.com, and bookmark that page, because for this course, and hopefully after this course, you are going to be using it quite a lot. If you type in Google Scholar, and Google Scholar, of course, what it does is it aggregates the academic literature mainly, also patents, but we're not going to be working with patents, intellectual property, for this course. But it aggregates many databases, and it's gotten better in the last 5 years. It wasn't so reliable before. It was quite incomplete, but academics, we use it every day, and I think everyone around the world is using it now, and they've grown the databases quite impressive, in a very impressive way. So even well-established academic catalogs and databases are not as good as Google Scholar is right now. And so what I did here is I went to Google Scholar on the left-hand side, and I searched for economic inequalities in South Korea, right? So you can read a bunch of academic articles, academic papers on economic inequalities in South Korea, and they are going to tell you, probably most of them are going to be very quantitative, very macro. Some of them might be very qualitative. They might tell you how it feels, like they might interview people and try and understand their lived experience in economic hardship in South Korea, or in any other country, of course. But what I wanted for you to understand here is that you are going to get some knowledge after reading some of those papers. Let's say spending 2 or 3 hours reading those papers, you're going to gain some knowledge about economic inequalities in South Korea. But equally, if you go and watch movies like this movie Parasite, that won an Oscar and other accolades of world cinema, watching that movie is also going to give you a new understanding or new understandings of economic inequalities, socioeconomic inequalities in South Korea, right? So I'm in no way advocating for one of these ways of learning or one of these ways of knowing to be better than the other ones. I think life is very rich and very complex, and we need to learn in many different ways. So I'm only saying that academic knowledge, academic research is one way of knowing and one way of learning. And it has its benefits. Of course, it has its its contradictions and its disadvantages, many, but it definitely has a value. And so because you're doing a postgraduate course, we're going to be talking mostly about academic research. But of course, this is an invitation for you to enjoy life and engage with different ways of knowing beyond academic research, right? Even if you are planning to become an academic researcher, or especially if you're becoming an academic researcher. This is another one. This is a personal favorite of mine, this television show called Westworld. It's now the third season was finished last year, I think. And especially the season 1 is particularly good. But again, if you search the academic literature for using keywords such as perception, humanoid robots, well, a lot of studies have been conducted in the last 10-15 years on how people perceive robots, especially humanoid robots, meaning robots that look like humans. But of course, if you engage with a science fiction work, a piece of science fiction like Westworld, you're going to spend a few hours thinking and engaging with this type of knowledge and with this type of questions, right? Here is another example. On the left-hand side, you have a poem by Pablo Neruda, Chilean poet from the mid-20th century, called A Dog Has Died. And it's a beautiful poem. You can pause the video here and read it at your own pace. But then we have on the right-hand side a study called Pet Bonding and Pet Bereavement Among Adolescents. And it's a study they did, quantitative research about how adolescents, how teenagers experience the death of their dog, right, of their pet. Again, two very different systems of language. One is poetry, the other one is academic research. Two very different ways of looking at the world or expressing ideas. But I do suggest that both are equally important, equally necessary, equally valuable to understand the complexities of life. And a couple more, one looking at history and the other one, the quantitative one. All right, so what are research questions? We're going to finish with this for now. What are research questions? I think particularly, I mean, I don't want to get too theoretical, but particularly for people in the field of creative technologies, I do feel that when you are a practitioner and you are practicing for a few or many years, doesn't matter, you keep encountering things that spark your curiosity. And these are things that are intellectual things that sit outside of your professional practice, right? So whether you are designing, whether you're a graphic designer, industrial designer, an interaction designer, a web designer, or a software engineer, or an artist, or whatever type of practitioner you are, teacher, whatever you are, you happen to be working on, if you've had in the last few years, if you've had an increasing number of questions that you go like, but I wonder, why is this way? How else could this be done? Who else has dealt with this type of issues? Who else has asked these questions? All of those things are going to inform your practice, but unfortunately for practitioners, they don't get paid to engage with this type of questions. They get paid to solve a problem, to design something, to teach something, to produce something. But professional life is not particularly good at giving people the space and the time to think and to read and to talk about these questions. So I think that's the value of academia. The value of academia is that it creates a space, or the spaces, to pause and reflect and think and look at something in detail, analyze it systematically, and produce new ways of understanding things. As a designer myself, I was a professional designer when I was very young, and what drew me to academia or academic questions or research questions or philosophical questions, if you want, is that I kept seeing incredibly proficient designers that were very, very good at their craft, and they were producing what I thought was a lot of knowledge, but they were not documenting anything. And I thought, when these people die, they are going to take everything they've learned, they're going to take it with them, right? It's not going to help the next generation of designers. And that's what made me go to academia and say, hold on, there is this space in academia where we can document what we do, reflect what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and hopefully that's going to inform the next generation of professionals or people that are working right now in remote places. So research questions are questions into the unknown, questions to study in detail, systematically something, questions to discover new facts, arrive at new understandings, draw new conclusions, elaborate new explanations, questions to describe relationships, formulate new arguments, synthesize new insights, questions to change practice, to inform practice, to solve problems, a question that emerges from reflective practice. And in everyday language, we say that research questions are basically an itch that you need to scratch, that you really, really need to scratch. And it's an itch that grows and tells you that you need to stop doing what you're doing or take a break and scratch that itch. That's what a research question is, an intellectual itch. And by the way, they are not always called research questions, and they are not always in question format. So sometimes it can be a motivation, a positioning, an issue that you want to explore, that you want to advance, that you want to examine. So it doesn't have to be a question, but it usually is. But in different fields, and certainly the term research question is not used across academic fields and academic disciplines. In some disciplines, they say, no, we don't ask questions, we don't engage with questions, we don't answer questions, and it's debatable. They don't use the language, but they engage with a statement or a motivation or a positioning or an issue that they explore and that they study in detail and critically. All right, so this is a last sort of like metaphor for this module. This is longer than I thought. This is a photograph on the left-hand side of land reclamation, basically creating islands. This is very common in Southeast Asia, in European countries like the Netherlands. Land reclamation is a huge engineering endeavor, and here we're using it as a metaphor. If you think of land as knowledge, and this particular machinery is producing knowledge, so you can think of that machinery as a research machine, as a research project. Could be a bunch of PhDs, or it could be professional researchers understanding issues. And that's fine, because we expand land, we expand knowledge. So knowledge understood as land. So the more we accumulate, the bigger the island, the bigger the knowledge. But the problem is, the analogy here is that as you do that, the coastline increases, right? So if you think of that from a map, kind of like on the right-hand side, the more land you put on the island, the bigger the island, but even bigger, even longer gets the coastline around that island, right? And there, the metaphor there is that the coastline is what we ignore. It's ignorance. So the more we know, this is a nice way to say that the more we know, basically the more we don't know, right? So that seems a bit contradictory, but if you map it as the land you're adding to the island and how that is actually increasing the size of the coastline, so your coastline is the ignorance and the land is the knowledge. All right, a couple of things. This is the handbook, postgraduate handbook that I talked about in the beginning. They talk about research questions, and this is actually taken from the part where we bring an examiner to examine your research, either as a master's or as a PhD student. You produce in the end a thesis or a dissertation, but usually a thesis. We send it to examiners and we ask them to produce a report when they assess that thesis. And one of the very first question we ask them is, how is the research question formulated or defined in this piece of work? So just so that you imagine how important, just so that you get an idea how important it is to be able to start your research, any type of research, with a good question, right? That's going to be the basis of your work. So here's what we ask you to do for this week. We ask you to reflect on your practice and tentatively formulate some research questions, right? Reflect on your practice, reflect on how your practice connects to research, and formulate some tentative, some preliminary research questions. Some of them, maybe you've had them for many months or years, for a long time, but maybe others you can start thinking about them right now, right? Like if you could ask some profound questions about your work, about your passion, about what interests you, what would those questions be? You can also identify questions that other people ask, so you can either talk to people that are ahead in the research journey, or you can read what they write, or listen to podcasts, or watch some YouTube interviews or presentations, and try and annotate, write down what are the questions that they are engaging with. What are the research questions that people in your area are working with or have worked with in the past. When you start reading some research outputs, and that's going to be our next session, you are going to find that it's very common for a study at the end of the report, or at the end of the paper, or at the end of the thesis, people write down new questions that the research produced. So they say, at the beginning we were interested to know more about A, and as we did that, now we realize that we need to know more about B, C, D, and F. Remember, the land and the coastline. So the one question you tackle with your research is going to trigger more questions, and usually better questions than the original one. You can also write down 10 different variations using different words, using different synonyms, using different grammar, using different ways of looking at your questions. Write down 10 variations. That's always very helpful, very, very informative. And we're going to be checking your research questions for clarity, for value, for feasibility. What are the possible outcomes? What type of study is likely to inform that question, and how original it is. So the more you can think of those aspects, but some of them are really hard for you to know, so we're going to help you with that. We're going to tell you if your question is clear, your questions are clear, if they seem to have what type of values they are embodying, what type of ethics they are embodying, how feasible they are. Because if you ask, like, what is the meaning of life? Like, that might be a really interesting question, but it's just not feasible, especially for a PhD or a master's project, right? You can also organize your research questions, start organizing your research questions by type, scale, and so on, and start searching the literature using your research questions. We direct you to Google Scholar, scholar.google.com or .co.nz, depending on where you are. You can access Google Scholar through the AUT library with your student ID. You log into the student library and then go to Google Scholar on databases. The benefit of that is that it's going to give you extra functionalities if you visit Google Scholar through AUT library than if you just go directly. The disadvantage is that you cannot log in Google Scholar to create a profile, but maybe you don't have to worry about that now. Also, obviously, please go to library, the AUT library. They have wonderful databases. We pay a lot of money for that, I suppose. So go to the databases and start exploring some of the databases in the AUT library to conduct your search. Here is just an example. I've always been interested for some reason in what makes a good team. What is a good team and what makes a good team? So here's just an example of me going to Google Scholar and typing what makes a good team. And immediately you see there are more than 4 million articles that come up with what makes a good team, right? Obviously not all 4 million are relevant, maybe just the first few hundred are, but still that tells you there is a lot of work there. Let's say that I'm also interested in how people are using technology for bullying, either to bully other people or as a means to address and discourage bullying. So I can also type bullying and technology as my keywords, and that gives me 250,000 articles, 250,000 articles on bullying and technology. Now, what happened here is, for your weekly activity, in one case, I typed the question, what makes a good team? Basically no keywords, just literally the question. And in the other case, I only typed 2 words as keywords. I didn't type the question. I chose 2 keywords that I thought were representative of my interests. So this is what we ask you to do in the week. Start engaging with Google Scholar, start typing your questions, your keywords, and go to the forum on Blackboard and look at the forum entries and create your own entries, create your own posts on the forum, and tell us what are your questions, what are your keywords, what are you finding, what are your top results when you're looking at your questions, and show us different variations of your questions, and we're going to engage in the forum and talk about the different questions that people are looking at. That was definitely longer than I thought. I thought I would stick to half an hour, but that was longer. I hope you enjoyed that, and see you in the next session. Kia ora.